Hey church, it is Thursday, which means it's time for some wisdom, and I'm happy to be imparting some to you. Actually, it's not from me, God's word will be giving it to us, so rest assured. We are looking at Proverbs, and the first several chapters of Proverbs are framed as a parent giving wise advice and instruction to their son. So we're to think of them as parental wisdom, showing us how to live a godly life. Now, whilst it may seem just like parental wisdom, it's more than that, isn't it? It's God's wisdom. So as we read, it may be helpful for you to picture yourself sliding your chair up closer to God's as he imparts upon you wisdom for living as a disciple of Jesus. Today's reading, chapter 1, verses 8 to 19, has a heading which is quite helpful. The heading is Warning Against the Invitation of Sinful Men. And that's exactly what this passage does. It warns us against the invitation of sinful men, the people we get involved with, the company we keep, the ideas we allow to influence us. Verses 10 to 14 are a picture of a group of delinquents trying to entice a young man into a robbery. There's valuable loot for him. There's going to be quite a lucrative robbery. They'll be able to divide the spoils among themselves, and so the prospect must be pretty attractive. But in verses 15 and 16, the parents call him to stay away from them because they're evil. So far this is a moral issue, isn't it? Don't get involved because they're evil. It's wrong. It's morally wrong. It's wicked to shed innocent blood, so stay away from these guys. But now the moral issue is going to turn more into a practical issue when in verses 17 to 19, they show that it's not only wrong, but it's also foolish to engage in this sinful behaviour. Let's have a look at verses 17 to 19. How useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. So verse 17 contrasts the behaviour of this gang with birds, right? Birds are smart enough to see a net and fly away from it. Yet this group of hoodlums can't see that they're walking straight into danger by living a sinful lifestyle like this. Verse 18 then tells us that they are in fact only ambushing themselves, aren't they? That when we engage in sin, we are harming ourselves, not just those external people, and even losing our own lives in the process, as verse 19 points out. This passage shows us that it's both immoral and stupid to engage in sin. Evil is both morally and intellectually wrong. When we sin, we're breaking God's commandment and therefore incurring his wrath. What we see here is that wisdom isn't just a question of what's intellectually right or wrong, but what is ethically right and wrong. In fact, in wisdom literature, you can't separate the two. Because when we understand the way that God works, we find that to live righteously is to live intelligently. It is the better way to live. It is the smarter way to live. Because even if we miss out on short-term gain that may be available when we sin, we know that the smartest way to live in step with God, the smartest way is to live in step with God and his commandments. Biblical wisdom is all of life wisdom. And whilst it is wrong to obey because we think it's going to lead to better outcomes for ourselves, that's not our motivation for obedience, we are comfortably and helpfully reminded that when we do obey from the Spirit dwelling within us, it will work out best for us. And this theme is repeated throughout wisdom literature, but sometimes we may not think it holds true, right? Sometimes it may seem more intelligent to follow the crowd than to follow God's word. If you're in business, it may be tempting to cut corners like others do. It often leads to their financial gain, and we think, well, it'll do the same for us. It'll be beneficial. It may not be right, but it's smart. Or socially, it may seem wiser to take the popular opinion and go with the crowd on certain topics or issues because it will lead to more relationships, more friendships for you, less complicated friendships at least, or maybe even more job prospects. So often we may be faced with an easy option, a quick option that seems so attractive because it works so well for others. These things that work well, people do the wrong thing, but it's quicker, it's easier, and it's more lucrative, so why not? May not be right, but it's smart. But this passage, as well as many others in wisdom literature and throughout the Bible, invites us to obedience as the wisest, most intelligent path. Because obedience to God, whilst seemingly foolish in the world's eyes, has an eternal perspective. It plays the long game. This is eternal wisdom, and when you follow it, you will be vindicated in the end. The life of Jesus is a good example, isn't it? Whilst his obedience was, at times, very attractive to many people, his refusal to live by the standards of this world led to his death. So it may appear that his obedience was foolish, because here he is, dead, on a cross. But, and we all know the story, God raised him from the dead. But there's a reason. Because sin was unable to hold him. Sin was unable to hold him because of his perfect obedience. And Paul tells us too that this resurrection, this vindication will be ours, that Jesus, in 1 Corinthians 15, is the first fruits of all who have fallen asleep. That we too, believers in Jesus, will experience resurrection. Not because of our obedience, but because of his. And so in all of this, we're encouraged by the author of Hebrews. Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 3. We are told, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. When you're tempted to lose heart, when you are weary, when you are tempted to think that obedience to God is foolish, that all these other people are getting ahead while you're lagging behind, keep your eternal perspective. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. The embodiment of wisdom and the constant reminder that righteousness and wisdom go hand in hand. God bless.